Digitization has played a critical role here, where in our factories, the digitization of our production processes, our utilities, the running of the assets, the motors and so on that we have, through the digital tools that we have put in place, a lot of those productions have been possible. I think by putting your own house in order, it gives you a credible position as well to ask others to work on the same and have a clear blueprint in place for our suppliers for their scope 1 and 2 emissions. We are now focusing on the 300 key suppliers that we have, whose services and products that we buy, and they account for about 60% of our upstream emissions. And we have selected them because we believe that that's where we can have the most impact.
This is Radical Reinvention, a show by 0100 about reimagining global supply chains. I'm Kevin O'Mara. I've spent 30 years working in supply chains, and in that time, I've learned a lot about how we move stuff and the people who move that stuff around the planet. I've also learned that supply chain doesn't always move with the planet or people in mind. So, our mission at 0100 is an ambitious one for sure. We're pushing the biggest companies in the world toward a 0% carbon, 100% digitized global supply chain. This means a world where people's needs are met, but the planet is preserved. We believe it's possible, but we know we can't do it alone. That's why we're building a community of the world's most innovative supply chain pioneers and industry experts, then working together to tackle some of the biggest challenges facing the planet today. And we're inviting all of you along for the ride. Join us as we work to create a sustainable and responsible supply chain, one radical reinvention at a time. Today's episode is about something we hear about a lot when we talk about supply chains: resilience. It's something every major supply chain company and executive thinks about constantly, especially after the last 3 years of volatility. And with resilience alone hard enough to achieve, is it possible to also run a sustainable and responsible supply chain at the same time? I think so, but it definitely requires some planning. And that's part of what makes digitization so appealing. That's why one of our mottos here at 0100 is digitize to decarbonize, meaning we see digitization as vital to the work of decarbonization. That's why we're digging into digital roadmaps today. To help us do that, our research science director, Colin, will be joining us to talk about what it means to stress test your digital roadmap. He'll walk us through some case studies of companies doing this well right now. We'll also get a chance to hear a bit from Willem Uijen, the Chief Procurement Officer at Unilever. Unilever is the massive company behind hundreds of household brands like Dove and Seventh Generation and Ben & Jerry's. And Willem's responsible for sourcing materials and managing suppliers. This is obviously a huge job that is changing rapidly in the face of the digitization and decarbonization efforts we're pushing so hard for. So I'm excited to hear what Willem has to say about this stuff from a procurement perspective. Okay, let's jump in. I'm joined by Colin Gilbert here, who heads our research science group within 0100. Colin's going to take a look at some of the data that lives behind this digital roadmap conversation, some of the cases and some of the conversations we're having with the wider community, and help me sort of pull this thing apart a little bit. So, Colin, it's great to have you here for this conversation.
Hey, Kevin. Thanks for the invitation. Very excited about today's topic. We're going to talk about digital roadmaps, which is a really interesting topic to conclude the year with because it's at the forefront of how people in supply chain can accelerate through their various goals going into next year and beyond. So, from my perspective, digital roadmaps is definitely a trending term, but I don't think it's necessarily a consistent term. I'm interested in if you agree or disagree with this. Everyone I've talked to seems to have a digital roadmap, but the definition, the scope, or the sophistication of that document varies widely from organization to organization. What's your view on that?
I think you're right. The variance is massive, and it's one of the problems with talking about digital roadmaps. I have a view about the way it ought to be done, which if you really want to get super simple and practical, it should be a PowerPoint in a single page. That's my view of a digital roadmap. You can go as deep as you want to under that, but the digital roadmap is what am I putting together from a digital technology perspective that connects my operations from the customer back to the supplier. And that basically, for people to have a grounding and understanding what you're even talking about, there has to be some lingua franca. There has to be some common understanding. And the common understanding is that this flows typically from right to left, from the customer backwards. I don't think that matters a ton, but I do think it matters that you don't try to reinvent the concept of a digital roadmap when people have a vision of what it looks like already.
I still think, regardless of how we're describing the format, the definition can be a little bit nebulous at face value. Google's Ngram tool allows you to basically look at frequency of patterns that recur in all printed materials in the Library of Congress and its equivalents over the last 5 centuries, from 1500 up until today. And it's not surprising to most people that the word digital had basically no usage until the post-war period. What's interesting is that digital in combination with roadmap never appeared in close proximity until about 1983. And then in the last 15 years, from 2008 to today, its usage is basically quadrupled. It's gone asymptotic. So just reading one of the more consultancy types of descriptors, a digital roadmap is a high-level document that outlines what your business wants to achieve, identifying some digital initiatives that can get you there. It provides a blueprint for action that aligns with your digital initiatives with short and longer term business objectives. Do you think, Kevin, that definition is valid within the context of supply chain, or is it missing something?
It's kind of valid, but it's way too generic, and you can't really do anything with that. What's missing from that definition is usability. And the reason I gave you the little description that I did a moment ago, which is a PowerPoint document with boxes and arrows, is because that's usable. The reason it's usable is if you take it from the meeting where everybody said, yeah, okay, that basically makes sense, to the teams who actually have to go do it. Like, for instance, engage a software vendor who's going to sell you a third-party software package. Get together with them and figure out how to deploy it. How you're going to hook it into your existing systems, what data you're going to pull, what that's going to put in front of the user, what they can do with it once they have that, and how that somehow is going to lead to resilience. That's something where if you don't start with some kind of a familiar jumping off point, that sub-team who is not in that meeting will not get it. In other words, I think a digital roadmap owes you, the phrase you use, blueprint, in that little walkthrough, it owes you the ability to actually execute, not just agree on the intentions. A blueprint lets you actually install the mechanical infrastructure, the electrical infrastructure, the structural beams, the coatings, the windows, everything, and you know how to do it in sequence. And that's what has to happen with the digital roadmap. I can't just dream about digitization and making me more responsible and more responsive and more resilient. I have to have a clear plan that says, I'm going to fix this issue I have with visibility into my suppliers when they go short, of how fast they can come up with a substitute and where they can get it to me from. For me, a digital roadmap has executability as a key test of its overall performance. The stress test stuff, that's within a roadmap. It's not even a roadmap unless it's executable.
What do you think is the most common point of failure for this type of strategy document?
The data is big and messy, and it's growing like absolute crazy. You and I have had this conversation in the past, Colin. I believe that the data density, the digital density of the demand side of this loop that we like to draw is far bigger than the digital density of the supply side. And it's partially because it's so much unstructured data, it's personal reactions. Can you really get your head around the data that's going to help you do a good forecast, or really get your head around the data that's going to help you better solve supplier-based problems? The answer is yes. But if the data is only characterized in rows and columns, in tables, you're going to miss some of this.
And at its core, data is made more complicated in the context of supply chain because, simply put, a supply chain organization is not one organization. It's a series of partners in an extended value chain that extends from suppliers all the way back to customers and back around again. And so doesn't that just compound the point of failure? Is how do you get all the various data feeds to talk to one another, deconflict with one another, agree with one another, get visibility with one another, and ultimately interoperate?
Actually, that's a great characterization of the problem, Colin. Yes. You can solve a siloed problem with a digital tool beautifully because the nature of a siloed problem is it's got a box around it. It's only this big. What you can't do is have influences that flow back from demand, the customer, or up from supply, the sourcing universe. How do you take variability that comes from those two directions and bake it into that brilliant little solution you put in a box? If you can't understand how the data is different from what you're taking existing currently from that input and modify it to represent the intelligence that comes with that new data, you basically can't solve anything. So the fundamental issue is it's an end-to-end process. That's the definition of supply chain. It's the essence of supply chain. And problem solving with a digital roadmap is about how do you cope with inputs from upstream or downstream that change what it is you're trying to solve.
I think what would be beneficial here is to get a little bit of perspective from a practitioner solving these problems in the field. And so a friend of 0100, Willem, who's the Chief Procurement Officer at Unilever, is actually really pursuing the digitize to decarbonize mission from the role of procurement. So let's hear a little bit about his background, his recent initiatives, and most importantly, his definition of this value chain problem or the silification effect that you just mentioned.
My name is Willem Uijen. I'm the Chief Procurement Officer for Unilever. As a Chief Procurement Officer, we have sales on the front end of our value chain. It's very much about procurement on the back end. So this is about establishing good relationships with our suppliers for all of the services and materials that they provide, to make sure that we have the developments to bring in the right innovations, to make sure that we buy our materials, obviously, with the right value, that we drive. If you look at our compass commitments, the sustainability commitments that we have, the majority of those are only possible to achieve if we work together with our suppliers. As we have so many smallholder farmers and small companies linked into our value chain, that's really where the crux of the matter sits. So working on these programs is a big part of the work that I do as a Chief Procurement Officer. I think a very important element through the digitization that we see coming through for procurement as well. The work that we do on resilience and agility in the value chain is something that is important for every supply chain, I believe, in today's world. But in particular for Unilever, with such a vast network that we have, that work on resilience and agility in the value chain is absolutely critical to be able to serve our consumers best. We did announce our net zero emissions, our target by 2039. By half of 2020, this was in June. And that target was very much in addition to the science-based targets that we already had in place as well to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions from our own operations by 2030. And we also committed to halve the greenhouse gas footprint of all of the products that we have. And we look at that per consumer use across the value chain and achieve that by 2030. There is just no time to wait up to 2050 when there is the possibility to deliver that target earlier. And therefore, in recognition to that need and the possibilities that we saw in our entire value chain, not just our own operations, we have committed to that end goal, involving all of the business groups, the functions and the markets that we have in our company. Now, we do know that we need to move quickly across all parts of the business for this, with our factories, the workplaces that we have, all of the partners that we have, the brands that we have in our value chain. And that's the only way that we see that we can influence a wider system change as well, by involving our brands into driving that climate change action plan faster, by the Climate and Nature Fund that we have in place. We put in place that 1 billion Climate and Nature Fund that is channeling investments into projects such as carbon sequestration or regenerative agriculture for our foods business, that is driving change faster. We learn a lot from that, and these projects are also giving us the means to scale the climate actions that we take a lot faster.
All right, Kevin, that was interesting to hear William's perspective. I want to go back to something you referenced before. You said that what we needed was either a stress test or a pressure test with regards to these digital roadmaps. Can you explain a little bit more by what you mean there?
Yeah, I think the stress test or pressure test is if you have a problem that is going to come up and it's going to be out of character with what you've solved in the past, can you get there? Or are you going to end up in an email, phone call, spreadsheet chain? So I think the thing is, there isn't really a simple all-round solution for every problem that comes along. You're going to have to be flexible about that. The stress test, pressure test on something like that has to do with how do you build backwards from the problem you're trying to solve into the technical capability, the digital capability you've put in place. Will it solve the problem that is out of scope or out of standard, out of norm? And can you get somewhere with it? Is it flexible enough to do that? That's what I'm testing for.
So I'm curious, in your way of thinking, what's on the menu? How many components of a stress test are there, and can we walk through them one by one?
Yeah, there are 6 in the way that we currently are working this with our community. The first one I like to start off with is cloud capability. And the reason I like to start off with that is it's all about speed and flexibility in using digital. So let's say you get excited about machine learning as a capability. What's nice about some sort of a microservice architecture cloud capability is you can pull data from your existing system, populate, think of it as a sandbox. It's operating out on a software as a service cloud type platform. And you can play at the user experience level, at the interface level, with all sorts of back and forth that a small user group wants to see if they can solve a problem. So if you're trying to get to a better forecast, let's say, or a better substitute for a customer, if I have cloud, I can play with that in a sandbox, come to a solution, and then feed it back in a kind of a controlled way into my existing system. Without cloud, I think you lack some of that flexibility.
But when you go to the data, it's pretty startling. So to break it down, latest estimates are about 94% of enterprises use a cloud service. And in fact, your average corporate employee accesses tens of cloud services each and every day. But going a little bit deeper, only 67% of enterprise infrastructure is currently cloud-based, and only about 50% of corporate data is currently stored in the cloud, or that was the number going into the pandemic that kind of tipped the balance. I think that what's most interesting about this first part of the stress test is what we've seen in the last couple weeks is that back to back, Microsoft and Amazon have announced supply chain specific solutions for Azure and AWS. And I think that those announcements going into the end of the year really validate what you're seeing in terms of vendors and customers aligning on this priority. So what's next in the stress test? What's number 2?
Next up, we talk about demand chain awareness. This means everything from the demand side, your channels, your customers, and anybody who's looking over your shoulder. It used to be that demand was really just basically flat files from a retailer back to a planner, or maybe it's in an engineer order environment, it's customer through your sales department in an RFP process of some kind. Very, very narrow. Increasingly, the demand chain has exploded into a whole slew of different channels, online being obviously the thing that really cracked this thing open, but everything in an omni-channel environment alters what you get from a demand chain perspective. Plus, everything consumers do when they're using your product. Do they like it? What do they talk about it? Are they influencers? Do they post YouTube videos about how to do it or how to hack it? And what do third parties say about you? Those things are all part of demand chain awareness.
I love this one mainly because I feel it's a universal imperative, regardless of whether you're selling a car or selling shoes or selling a pharma product, is that everybody has more or less the same consumer journey, from awareness to consideration to evaluation to purchase to retention and so forth and so on. And historically, how you shape that consumer journey has been through word of mouth, recommendations from friends and family, consumer reports. But each of these traditional sources has their digital counterpart. And I just saw this really interesting survey that just came out the other day that asked if social platforms were a better place to discover new products than search engines. And the results really surprised me because search engines, more than any other digital channel, really took over determining the consumer journey. And it was unique in not only how quickly search engines took precedence and prominence in that path, but their unique ability to actually expand the consideration set and expose you to things that you weren't aware of that complicated the consumer journey. But if you look at like how social platforms are beginning to trend, it's really interesting to break it down by age cohort. And so the survey asked each age cohort if they agreed or strongly agreed that social platforms were a better or the best place to discover new products. And the age splits are just incredible. 54% of Gen Z agree or disagree. 58% of millennials are in that same camp, so strict majority on both. Then it drops to 29% for Gen X, and then it drops to 3% for boomers. So there's this incredible age schism between the two, and I think a lot of that can be traced to the fact that social commerce, or buying products off of social platforms, took so long to get off the ground. And Instagram helped perfect the formula, and TikTok is just owning that process right now. And so something that we've been waiting for years is finally coming to fruition, but it represents this great avenue for brands to harness the data that is changing on a daily and hourly basis about what they need to overproduce, underproduce, etc., to get in front of a demand signal that they've never had before. I think that increasingly, the challenge for this part of the stress test is matching the demand signal to your customer profile, which does change dramatically from sector to sector and price point to price point. So not all of those age cohorts I mentioned are equally important if you're talking about fast fashion versus a major once-in-a-lifetime purchase or extending to B2B customers, etc. As you look beyond kind of demand signals, what's next in the stress test?
The next stress test is, we say, collaborative competence. And this is another ancient word in supply chain. We talk about collaboration since before I really became a researcher here. It is basically about how to solve problems. Planning in an age of disruption, which is where we are right now, has to get basically faster and smarter and more optionalized. You have to be able to solve problems creatively. We did a lot of great stuff in the early days of COVID, which really was exemplary of collaborative competence. This is a stress test for digital roadmaps now, because there is still too much point-to-point connectivity with suppliers. So the reality of collaborative problem solving with suppliers is phone calls and emails. The preferred method is finding some way, forwarding documents and creating documents together. It's really about finding solutions, finding substitutes, finding alternatives with your partners outside of your organization as quickly as possible, and doing so with the assist of technologies.
I think it's just worth noting that 0100's own survey shows that supply chain professionals, when they're ranking their top 5 tech investment areas, they put collaboration tools that would benefit a supplier in their expanded network, such as app store solutions or microservices. They put that above a lot of point solutions, whether you're talking about blockchain or digital twin or next gen ERP, etc. And to me, that really hints at a need for these additional prerequisites before we can unlock the ROI of a lot of the trending hot kind of value add tech solutions that get a lot more attention than the basic building blocks to accelerate on the next phase of digitization. I think Unilever has 300 key suppliers in Tier 1 alone. And he also talks very eloquently about what we'll call being agnostic with regards to technology and figuring out what it can do for you before you put it in a box and shove it into that digital roadmap that you alluded to.
In case of Unilever, that 60% of our total emissions come from raw materials and the packaging that we buy. So it's very important that we involve our partners in climate action. We have launched, therefore, the Unilever Climate Promise, which is where we ask our partners to also set public targets to halve their greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 and report on that publicly, on the progress that they make, share their footprint data with Unilever as well, so that we can work on this together. Now, over the last 15 years, if I look at that for Unilever in its own operations, we have been, I would say, quite successful in reducing our operational emissions. We've invested a lot in energy efficiency, switching to renewable electricity. I see this as well, that digitization has played a critical role here. where in our factories, the digitization of our production processes, our utilities, the running of the assets, the motors and so on that we have, through the digital tools that we have put in place, a lot of those productions have been possible. And we see that as well. I was quite happy to see that our factory in Dapada in India implemented a lot of these digital forefront running tools, has been recognized by the World Economic Forum as one of the lighthouse factories in sustainability quite recently. Now, that work that we do in our own operations, I think by putting your own house in order, it gives you a credible position as well to ask others to work on the same. And have a clear blueprint in place for our suppliers for their scope 1 and 2 emissions. We are now focusing on the 300 key suppliers that we have, whose services and products that we buy, and they account for about 60% of our upstream emissions. And we have selected them because we believe that that's where we can have the most impact. We have them in the Unilever Supplier Climate Program. There we provide tools and the resources to help our partners to accelerate their actions. And we do share a lot of practices that they have put in place. It is very much a collaborative effort. I have to say that we do learn as we go. This doesn't come without the usual bumps in the road. Now, last year we ran a pilot. We had a subset there of our suppliers to understand what sort of guidance and support that they would need. We've had a working group here as well. This was actually with the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, where we looked at the standardization of footprint data, the exchange between companies and suppliers, and make that technology agnostic so that every partner or every supplier, as well as ourselves, could learn from the practices that each one was putting in place. Now, that goes as deep as even agricultural raw materials, where we work with individual farmers to lower the footprint of the ingredients that we buy. And we do that through our regenerative agricultural principles. And this is very much a way of farming. So it helps farmers to put practices in place that help to store carbon in healthy soils, improve water and air quality. And that shifts us away from agricultural practices that put the supply chains at risks by putting more sustainable practices in place.
It was really interesting to hear Willem talk about digitization in the context of a sustainability challenge. For the other buckets on your stress test, do you have a sense of what accommodations can be made for what different organizations are trying to accomplish? Whether that's a sustainability challenge or a digital challenge or an operational challenge, basically what is their end goal or their end state that the digital roadmap is driving towards?
Yeah, and this is where most roadmaps make the mistake of conflating a point solution with a general competence. So for me, buckets 4 and 5 are data competence and carbon consciousness. Both refer to outputs rather than inputs. Leadership doesn't really care about how big the data lake is. It cares about your capacity to deliver value-added insights from that data lake and at what throughput. Similarly, leadership doesn't care about carbon that's easy to measure. It cares about getting ahead of regulation that measures what we don't yet know, as in Scope 3 carbon.
So I think what you're trying to say is there's too much data and not enough insight, regardless of what you're trying to attack or what you're trying to analyze. And I think that aligns with a lot of third-party findings in the literature right now. PwC did some excellent analysis at just the rate that the digital universe is growing. I think it grew tenfold in a 24-month period from like 4 zettabytes to 44 zettabytes or what have you. And most of that is being juiced by just the raw amount of user-generated content that we kind of alluded to before in these demand signals that are being generated on social media platforms and e-commerce channels. But the other thing that they found that was kind of buried in that same study was that the best performing institutions or enterprises don't have more data at their disposal. They just analyze it on average 5 times as frequently. And I think in supply chain, in academia, we're seeing the same trend. You used to see 2 to 4 academic articles each and every year on predictive analytics, and now we're seeing double or triple that submission rate in the last couple years.
Yeah, exactly. Artificial intelligence is an incredibly powerful tool for sorting through new kinds of data, especially the more unstructured stuff. And things like blockchain, satellite imaging, what Willem is going to talk about in his examples at Unilever, that kind of tech increases the amount of data you have available which then feeds into a virtuous circle of more and faster analysis and application of that data for real business problem solving, which leads you to ask for more data. So there is a bit of a feedback loop, and the tech itself for data collection and data analytics, it's not enough to just work harder. You do, in fact, have to bring in the right tech to get the right data and then chop it up in the right ways to help you solve problems.
Yeah, let's listen to what Willem says about this deforestation initiative in Sumatra.
For deforestation, what we have learned, first of all, is that we used to certify the sourcing of our materials. And we do recognize that you need to go beyond certification in order to verify that your supply chain, and in particular, the first mile, is really deforestation free. The way that we have done that is basically by using three elements. We built greater transparency and traceability in our supply chain. We focus our sourcing on suppliers who share our sustainability ambitions, as you really do need your partners to have the same values and similar type of programs in mind. And we do empower farmers and smallholder farmers in particular in the communities where we source from. What is particularly important here is traceability and transparency. And there you really need to make use of technology. Technology is for us the major driver to make our value chains more transparent and more traceable. And we have quite a few partners that we work with the implementation of things like satellite imaging, artificial intelligence, geolocation data that is helping us to provide new insights and data, new tech solutions that help us to make our supply chain deforestation free. A few weeks back, I was in Indonesia, went to Sumatra to see the palm plantation, some of the programs that we have with smallholder farmers, as well as the oleochemicals plant that we set up just recently. And I think that's a great example of how technology is being used. What I saw there is that the people that do the collection of the bunches of the palm fruits have given permission to use their mobile devices to basically give information about the collection points, what the routes are that these fresh fruit bunches would take from the smallholder farmers up to the mills. That basically gives us the traffic patterns that you have between farms and mills. And the flow that we can get from that application gives you a direct link between the point of sourcing, our extended supply chain, as well as the smallholder farmers. And that really helps us to understand who's sourcing from whom. Now, at the same time, we're applying artificial intelligence, but we do that with satellite imaging to detect if there's any changes in the tree covers that you have there in Indonesia. And that's providing deforestation alerts. It's a bit the eye in the sky solution. And that helps us as well to find any threat where potentially trees would be felled. We're using blockchain technology as well. It gives us a digital record of the commodities journey that you have throughout the value chain. So it gives us more data about mills, about refineries, and about the processors where our materials are handled. In this case, the example that I saw directly was palm, but in 2 weeks' time, I'll be in the United States to see the same, what we're doing there for soybean oil, and in January as well for cocoa. The idea behind that is very much to make the sustainability credentials that we have, make them traceable and immutable. Google Cloud is another example there, and I just say that because I really believe that the kind of things that are possible with technology today, the level of certainty that that gives you in transparency and traceability simply is not possible without technology. With Google Cloud, we now use that as a command center. It gives us a full picture of what's happening in the supply chain, especially in that first mile. And that is combining almost 40 years of satellite imagery, some good solid data storage and machine learning that goes over that is giving us new insights. And that provides us means to monitor the mills, the landscape, the farms in a geography up to a level that was just not possible before. So we continue to test and scale new technology solutions as they come up and expand these ever further to get us towards that goal.
Excellent. So, Kevin, what's bucket number 6?
S&OP, Sales and Operations Planning, or Integrated Business Planning. Absolutely everybody's working on that all the time. And we think that there's a path forward on that. You want to guess what it is?
What are you calling this?
We are calling it C3OP.
C3PO? Like, these are not the droids we're looking for?
No, but you're not the first person to tease me about that. C3OP. All these capabilities we've talked about up to now, they really all play into one sort of unifying concept, which is how do I optimize, not just for customers and cash which is what S&OP is about and always has been, but also for carbon. If I'm carbon conscious, as well as demand chain aware and collaboration capable, and I'm data competent, and I'm also working in the cloud, I can begin to really spin the wheels ever faster on how to shift from just managing supply and demand balancing, which is hard enough. I don't want to underestimate that. That is still absolutely mission one for supply chain, but to do so in the context of a carbon requirement as well. So yeah, we say C3OP, that's cash, customers, and carbon operations planning.
I just had one follow-up question. I know from experience that IBP is very focused on securing what customers refer to as operational agility. In your mind, does C3OP unlock something else that people are seeing post-pandemic in the age of perpetual disruptions, et cetera?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's about resilience. We always want to be agile in response to our customer, and we always want to be agile in response to our supply base, whether they are short or create opportunities because they're long or they have something new. That's always been true, and that will always be true. What we need to be better at is resilience. And there's a resilience issue that we see coming in the next 6 to 12 months, which is why we do these stress tests around a tightening economy and some serious geopolitical tensions. But there's a longer-term resilience question we have to deal with, which is climate change. It is in motion. It is on our plate, that is in supply chain, more than anybody else. We really do own Scope 3. So I think the real added piece to what IBP has always delivered, which is at least the promise of more agility, is agility and resilience in the face of not just, tough times from an economic standpoint, but tough times from a climate standpoint, tough capability of the system to support what is currently 8 billion plus people and will be probably leveling off at around 10 billion people within a decade or so, at which point we better be good at managing not only cash and customers, but also carbon. That's what I mean by resilience, and I think that's what this is about.
The digital programs that we're running in our manufacturing sites and how that has changed, not just in sustainability, but that is making a change in the operational performance that we have of our factories.
I would love to be carbon conscious and be able to communicate with my customers about what we're doing by coordinating with my suppliers, collaborating with my suppliers, to preferably choose materials or components or inputs that they have in relative abundance and work my way towards something that the customer feels good about.
The possibilities are really endless, from the operational improvement up to safety, the end-to-end value chain, integration with our partners. What technology is allowing us to do today is to make the supply chain a lot shorter, a lot faster, by having that integration through technology of our suppliers directly with our own systems.
If you can't get it down to a page, you ultimately have got too much complexity. It's on you to simplify it down, and I think you can, in any situation, boil it down to a page. All right, friends, there you have it. That's it for Radical Reinvention Episode 4. Thank you to Willem Uijen, the Chief Procurement Officer over at Unilever, and Colin Gilbert, the Head of Research Science here at 0100 for joining us today. You can find more about the topics and the links referenced throughout the episode in the show notes. 0100 community members can check out our full interview with Willem online at 0100.com. See you next time.
This episode of Radical Reinvention was produced by Kevin O'Mara, Catherine Perry, Mike Silverman, Nick Heineman, Diane Hope, and me, Victoria Marin. Colin Gilbert contributed research insights for the episode, and Ko Takasugi Chernovin is our sound engineer and also composed our theme music. To find out more about 0100 and to check out our content library, go to 0100.com. If you're interested in joining our community of contributors, send us a note at hello@0100.com.